Some of you were talking about and others were laughing about my purple shoes. Huh? Yeah, purple. Well, I got on a purple vest. Look here. That's my red shoes. Well, and the reason I brought this is because of our sermon tonight. I wanted to start out by showing you this and asking you, oh, it's dusty, asking you if you knew how much you had in common with shoes. And it's probably more than you might realize. First of all, this shoe had a designer and a maker. And so did you. Didn't you? Didn't God design you? Didn't God create you? Somebody designed and made this shoe. And it was made for a purpose. Now, of course, I don't have to tell you what the purpose of shoes are. And so are we. Now, I could take this shoe and I could put a leather strap across it, and I could call it a purse. But it wouldn't be a purse, it'd still be a shoe. Today's generation is turned upside down. Girls will go to the doctor and have things added and call themselves a man. And boys will go to the doctor and have things whacked off and call themselves a woman. But you know what? God still sees them as men and women. And this is still a shoe no matter what you add to it or take off of it. It's got a sole. Of course, it's spelled different, so I won't talk much about that. And usually shoes that you tie up have eyes, and so do you. Now you're going to say, well, I got you on that one because I only have 2 eyes, and that thing's got 8 eyes. Well, let me tell you something. Yeah, you might only have 2 sets of eyes, but you've got more than 2 sets of eyes watching you. The world's watching you. And a lot of times, even those in the church are watching you. And I guarantee you they're not watching you so that they can see the good stuff that you do, so they can compliment you. They're watching you so they can catch you doing something that they think is wrong. Now, I brought this because the red reminds me of the blood of Christ, right? It's also got a tongue, but these strings go across that tongue to keep it from flopping around. If you're saved by grace through faith, you got the blood of Christ applied to your life. Your tongue should not be flopping around talking about people all the time, right? Okay, Louis, you can go back in there now. In the spring, I'll come preach again. I'll wear my yellow ones. Huh?
Said it had a heel too.
Yeah, it did have a heel. The sermon tonight, if it doesn't reflect on you, you'll know somebody. Somebody will come to your mind. In each point of my sermon, somebody will come to your mind that this will remind you of. Because I want to ask this question. If your Christian life could be compared to a shoe, what kind of shoe would you be? Now, I know that's silly. And I know it's a serious thought, but it's also a comical thought. So if I say something in here that you think's funny, just laugh. It won't kill you for laughing a little bit. I'm only going to name a few because there's hundreds of kinds of shoes, but I'm only going to name a few of them. Probably take me longer through the first 2 than it will the latter ones. But the first shoe that come to my mind whenever I was thinking about this was a flip-flop. When I look into the Word of God, you know, from Genesis through, you're going to find people who flip-flopped all the way through. Think about Moses, whenever he come to take the children of Israel out of bondage and into the promised land, they got out there in the desert and started complaining around saying, well, I wish we were back in Egypt. At least there we had onions and leeks and melons and meat and cucumbers and things to eat. So we wish we were back there. They wanted to go back, was willing to go back and be slaves in Egypt for their belly's sake, than to go into the promised land and be free for their soul's sake. So it is today with so many people. So many have never accepted Christ because they want the pleasures of life. They want what makes them feel good constantly. And you know why? Because they're in search of something to make them feel good. And we've got what it is, salvation. That's what makes you feel good. But they won't go that route. They will look the world over to try to find something to satisfy their souls and they'll down the church when really the church has what they need. And that's salvation by grace through faith through the shed blood of Jesus Christ. And they rather stay out in sin and be a slave for their desires' sake. You know, later on, they began to complain too about the manna that God was feeding them. They called it light bread. They said, we loathe this light bread. And they were getting discouraged and disgusted at God for giving them that. Well, hey, that wasn't God's fault. When they came up out of Egypt, they only had to go a few days' journey and they would have been in the promised land. They brought enough food out of there with them that they had enough to do them till they got to the promised land. But because of their disobedience and because of their unbelief, they were out in that wilderness for 40 years. That wasn't God's fault. That was their fault. They were flip-flopping all the way through. Why? And you know, and they would flop and make God angry with them and get themselves in trouble. And we haven't now, all these thousands of years later, we haven't learned anything from that because we'll still do things contrary to the will of God and get ourselves in trouble. We become flip-floppers. But the greatest flip-flopper that I can find, I find them right in the very first of Genesis. And who do you think that would be? That would be Adam and Eve, the two greatest flip-floppers that ever came along. Because I read in the 3rd chapter of Genesis where, now let me stop to explain why, I always feel the need to say this. Whenever I was younger, Andrew Workman, some of you knew him, he was preaching and got in a big way of preaching and blew out his top dentures and he caught them in midair and stuck them back in his mouth and kept right on. I laughed about that for 50 years until I got mine. I don't laugh about that anymore because if I would preach with the force I used to, I'd blow them things halfway down that aisle. So it's not that I'm losing my religion. I've just lost my teeth. But anyway, in the 3rd chapter, I read where Satan came to Eve in the form of the serpent and started out with a question. Yea, hath God told you you can't eat of any of this fruit? She said, no, that's not what God said. God said that we can eat of all the fruit except the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. We can't eat that, nor shall we touch it, or we'll die. Well, there's two things right there I see. When people don't want to live according to the Word of God, they'll do exactly what the devil and Eve did there. The devil tried to add something or take away something out of God's words. He tried to take it away. Then Eve, she wanted to add something. God didn't say don't touch it. God said don't eat it. She's the one that added don't touch it. And so many people, they don't want to go by the Word of God. And in order to cause themselves to look better, they'll start adding things to the Bible and say it's too restrictive, when really God didn't say it at all. Maybe what they're saying, God didn't say at all or imply at all. They just want to put that in there because they don't want to live right. But at any rate, the devil told her, said, no, God knows that you're not going to die. You're not going to die. And after all, what did Eve know about death? She didn't know anything about spiritual death, did she? Because up until that time, there was no such thing as that. Well, what about natural death? Well, I don't even know how much she knew about natural death. No person had ever died. So what would she know about those things? And the devil said, but God knows that whenever you eat that, you'll become as gods, knowing good and evil. Well, folks, God didn't want them to know evil, because in order to know evil, they would have had to experience evil. And God didn't want that for them. But he kept on talking and she kept on listening. And the devil used the same 3 tactics against her that he used as against us. And that's lust of the eye, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. All sin can be categorized in one of those three categories. Listen, as the Bible proves that. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that's lust of the flesh. She wanted food for her body. She had to have it. And that it was pleasant to the eyes, that's the lust of the eye, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. Well, right there you got the pride of life. She wanted to be as wise as God. And she took it and ate. And you know what that verse says? She took the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave unto her husband with her, and he did eat. That rascal, he was there too. He should have stopped her. Maybe he didn't have any more power over his wife than a lot of us have over ours. But he didn't stop her. He was close enough, standing there close enough by that whenever she ate it, she gave it to him, and he ate too. Now, you know what? Here they flip-flopped. Because God, who had created them and gave them life and gave them the earth, all of the earth, and gave them a garden and planted them a garden eastward in Eden. He gave them all that. But they flip-flopped. It's more than they just denied what God said. Because whenever they turned toward the devil and accepted what he was saying, it was like they said, God, we don't believe you anymore. We cannot trust you anymore. You've let us down in one way or another, or some way, because you're holding that one fruit away from us. We don't want to serve you anymore. We want to serve the devil. And that's the way people are today, isn't it? They don't want to serve God. They want to serve the devil. But you know what? Let me ask you this question. In Ephesians, the writer says that Satan is the prince and the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. And then whenever Paul wrote to the Corinthians, he said, in whom the God of this world hath blinded the minds of them which believeth not. Let me ask you something. Whenever Satan, or Lucifer at the time when he was with God and wanted to ascend his throne above God, and God cast him out and cast him down to the earth, was that a promotion? No, that wasn't a promotion. So how in the world did he become known as the prince and the power of the air and the God of this world? Who promoted him to that? Who elevated him to that level? Well, I'll tell you who it was. Well, I'll read you a verse. Because I thought about that and I said, where did he get that? Who surrendered authority to him so that he could be prince of the air and the God of this world? You didn't have to go further than Genesis chapter 21. It said, and God said, let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. God gave man dominion over the earth. They were the ones that were in charge. But whenever they surrendered to the temptations of Satan, they turned that over to him and promoted him to the God of this world and the prince of the air, because they turned their back on the real God and made Satan their God. And they sold their soul into bondage. Here's the thing. Here's what Moses said about debt. Moses said, if you owe somebody some money, you need to pay them the money. And if you don't have enough money to pay them, then you need to sell your property and take that money and pay them. And if that still doesn't erase the debt, then you become a bond servant to that person. And you work for him until your debt is paid. Well, what happens if he dies before his debt is paid? Because, you know, those people kept adding interest on top of the debt. The Bible uses the word usury, is what the Bible uses for the word interest. And they would keep adding interest to it, so you can never pay yourself out of debt. So if the guy died, well, now he's free? No, well, yeah, he's dead. But his children has to go into bondage and keep working so that that debt could eventually get paid. And if they died, then their kids had to work until that debt was paid. And if that didn't work, then their kids would have to, unless there was a kinsman redeemer that would come along and say, I want to buy my kinsman out of debt. I'll pay the price myself, and I'll redeem them. And then if that happened, then they could become free again. Well, what do you think happened when Jesus was crucified? He got the keys to death, hell, and the grave. He snatched those from the hands of the devil, and he put an invoice in Satan's hand. I'm just playing this movie in my mind. This is the way I picture it. He slapped an invoice in the devil's hand saying, paid in full, written in blood. I'm the kinsman redeemer. No wonder he said, I'm redeeming them. I'm paying off their debt. Their soul does not have to be in bondage to you anymore. No wonder we can sing sweet as the song I'm singing today. I'm redeemed, I'm redeemed. Or the song, redeemed, how I love to proclaim it. Redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. So you know what? There's a lot of people today, even those that go to church, that flip-flop. Some flip-flop so often that when the pastor sees them coming, they don't know what kind of a person they're going to meet that day. Are they going to be in a good mood or a bad mood? Are they going to be feeling real religious? Or are they going to be feeling like the devil? Just what are they going to be like? Because they flip-flop. Well, I'll tell you something. If you flip-flop, or if you know somebody who flip-flops a lot, they're probably flopping a lot more than they're flipping. Okay. So, don't be a flip-flop. Bottom line to that is, don't be a flip-flop. There's another kind of shoe. You don't think about it much as a shoe, but it's a shoe. Baby booties. There are companies that produce millions of baby booties a year. And you know why? Because there's millions of children born a year. And there's nothing wrong with being a baby if you're a baby. But they make those little baby booties. But I'm going to tell you something. I've never seen a baby booty in size 10 double E. People say, well, boys would be boys. Yeah, but boys would be men if you help them grow up. Isn't that the way it is also in the church? Some people remain babies. It seems like the majority of their Christian life, they remain babies. Peter was talking to the people, and he wrote them and says, as newborn babes, desire the sincere milk of the word. In other words, you're a babe in Christ, so you are to desire the milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. Did they grow? Well, a lot of them did, but apparently some of them didn't. Because Paul tells them in Hebrews, for when the time ye ought to be teachers, ye have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God. And look what he said they had done. And are become such as have need of milk and not of strong meat. In other words, Paul was saying, it's time that you grow up. You don't need to be wearing baby booties. A baby drinks milk. Adults eat food. You know, I'm sure you see the common sense in that. Adults eat solid food. Digestion starts in your mouth with your saliva. Goes down and through into your stomach. The stomach secretes the chemicals that turns it into a white, creamy substance called chyme. It can go through your intestines and up your ascending colon, transverse colon, and then your descending colon into your sigmoid colon and all that. And the body uses every bit of the nutrients out of that food at every step of the way. And so God created adults so that they can break down food. But what about babies? They can't eat solid food. Did you ever see a baby spit up, look like cottage cheese? That's all right, as long as you're not eating cottage cheese at the time. But the thing of it is, babies, they don't need to break down milk because milk's already broken down. It's already a liquid. But when babies drink, God has designed the baby's belly that what it does, it produces a chemical that solidifies that milk and turns it into that cottage cheese looking stuff. And that's so that it will stay in the stomach longer, the baby is satisfied longer, and it can draw all the nutrients from the milk. Well, that's all right until they grow up. Then they got to have food. Well, see, in the Word of God, there's nothing wrong with you or anyone, a friend of yours, a family member, being a spiritual baby if they are a baby, if they're new converts. But there comes a time when they ought to be able to grow up, take off the baby booties, and start wearing some spiritual shoes that's better for them. Another thing about babies is they cry a lot. Well, you know, they cry if they're hungry, they cry if they're in pain, they cry if they're uncomfortable, but how else is a baby going to talk to you? It cries. You ever meet anybody along the way in the church that seemed like all they wanted to do is cry about stuff? They're never happy with this, they're never happy with that, they just cry and cry and cry around about it. Well, here's the thing. When a baby's born, it has what in its eyes? It's got basal tears. Well, we do too. We got basal tears. Those tears never do come out. That's just the moisture on your eye. That keeps your eye, keeps your eye in good shape. But there's another kind of tear that's called the reflex tears. Those are the tears that you shed whenever you're doing something like peeling an onion, and tears come down. You can't help it, that's just a reflex. Or you eat a hot pepper, tears will come down, that's a reflex tear. Those kind of tears are the way God designed us, that the body trying to rid itself of something. Even the eyeball saying, I got to get rid of this. And those are reflex tears. But the third kind of tear is, guess what it is? It's a psych tear, a psychic tear. And that's a tear that you cry if you're hurt, or if you're mourning about something, or you're in sorrow, or even if you're happy, or if you have fear, or if you're having pleasure. Those kind of tears come. Science discovered something about tears. You know, in the hospital, when you go in the hospital and they hang an IV bag and it's 0.9 saline, that means it's 0.9% salt. That's all it is. You're paying $100 for a bag of salt water that wouldn't even pickle a can of kraut. But science discovered that they could measure the salt content in a tear and know why a person is crying. Because the salt content is different. If you're crying because you're happy, there's a certain level of salt content in that tear. If you're crying because you're sad, or if you're depressed, there's a different level of salt in there. So they decided, after a baby was old enough to actually cry some tears, which would be about 3 or 4 weeks, they took some baby's tears and they measured the salt content in that baby's tear. And the doctor looked up, and this is a true story. The doctor looked up and said, do you know why this baby's crying? He's not hungry, not in pain. He's not at this moment. He's not. So this baby's crying right now, and according to the salt content in this baby's tears, that baby is mad. In fact, he is so mad that if he could, he'd go and slap the doctor that delivered him. That's how mad that baby was. You say, well, what's biblical about that? I'll tell you what's biblical about that. The Bible tells me that by nature we are the children of wrath. So it's no wonder babies are born mad. Wouldn't you be born mad too? If for 9 months all you did is laid around in a water bed and somebody else fed you and all the comfort, somebody else heated you. And it sounds kind of like welfare, don't it? And then all of a sudden you're out into an old cold world. And I'm telling you what, I've worked in those delivery rooms, and that's a nasty mess. I remember seeing a cesarean section, and wherever they cut that water gushed up out of there like a old faithful. Another time this woman was crying, get this thing out of me, get this thing out of me. And the doctor said, I didn't put that thing in you. You're going to have to get it out yourself. But it is a mess. But whenever they come out, then they get so cold and so shivery. Why? Because their whole world has been turned upside down. And so no wonder they cry and cry and cry. And there ought to come a time in the church when people quit crying and grow up. Now, wait a minute. I'm not saying become too distinguished. The most distinguished thing in the world is a corpse. Isn't it? You're dressed up the best you've ever been dressed up in your life, and you're laying there and you're keeping your mouth shut. You're real distinguished, but you're dead. And there's a lot of churches that way too. Oh, they're real dressed up. They're real pretty. They're real quiet. They're real dead. Oh, but they're distinguished. I'm not saying that, to do that. So then, do you know anybody who's a baby, booty Christian that needs to grow up? Okay, that's enough of those two. Let me run through these others real quickly. What about, it always amazes me that somebody will get saved and they will go to the creek, summer or winter, and wade into muddy water that they can't see the bottom of the creek. They don't know what dangers are down there, glass, nails, or where the drop-offs might be, or if there's a snake coming by. They don't know that. And they'll put their body in the hands of two people that maybe they barely know to stick them all the way under the water and bring them all the way back up. But yet, when it comes to foot washing, with that much water, clear water, warm water in a pan, they won't come and put their foot in that water. You know what kind of Christian that is? They don't want to get their feet wet. They're a rubber boot Christian. That's what they are. Just a rubber boot Christian. Don't want to get their feet wet. Well, okay. What about this? Stilettos. You know what a stiletto is? That's those real tall, skinny, high heels. You can kill a person with those things. In fact, it's been done.
Yeah.
And when I was working at J.P. Morgan doing director of health, medical director for a team that come in and do health screenings and all, those women coming down those marble aisles over there would sound like a herd of horses. And they'd be walking on those hills that high, and I would think, you know what? It wouldn't take much for you to twist your ankle, and you're going to drop 6 inches. You're going to tear every ligament you got out of your ankles. Well, I didn't tell them, and they kept doing it. Of course, one good thing, it couldn't sneak up on you because you could hear them coming a mile away. But you could kill somebody with one of those. The fact is, and that's been proven, because at one time when Sisera was the king of the host for king of Canaan, who is named Jabin, he was running from his enemy, and he sees a woman, Jael, that pretended, hey, I'm your friend, come, stay here in my tent. He comes in, she gives him milk, he gets real comfortable, he goes to sleep, and when he's asleep, she took a tent stake. The Bible called it a nail. And,
A nail.
Yeah. And drove it through his head. Just nailed his head to the floor. So, yeah, you can kill somebody with one of those. But you know what? You can do the same thing to the pastor. When a pastor works all week studying, preparing a sermon, listening to God, praying, and he comes to church so excited, he's coming in, he thinks, God's got a great message today. And before he can get 3 feet up the aisle, people, and I'm not saying it happens here, but I'm saying that I've seen it happen a lot. I've had it happen to me. They will attack. And they'll start bang, 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 because they misunderstood something that he said, or misunderstood something that he did or did not do. Instead of getting an appointment with him and trying to talk it out and find out who's right or wrong, they just want to beat his head off with one of those like a stiletto. Just kill him spiritually, leaving him to get up in the pulpit, spiritually killed, and try to share spiritual joy to the church. If you got something you want to talk to your pastor about, I think I know my brother well enough that you can talk to him. And share that with your friends too. Tell them, don't kill your pastor by picking on him all the time. And I'm not saying that to get brownie points. I'm too old for brownie points. I don't need brownie points. Hey, but if you want to write me a letter of recommendation, I'll slip it in my casket. I'll give it to God when I get there. I say, read this from Jim. Same way with, I used to call that puking on the pastor's shoe. When you come in, you puke on the pastor's shoe. Now you feel better because you got it off your chest. Leave him to clean up the mess, and you go home and sleep like a baby, and he goes home and stays awake for 2 nighs. Well, there's another kind of shoe that's called sneakers. We used to call them sneakers. I guess they call them athletic shoes now, but still they're sneakers. And there were sneakers in the Bible. What about Ananias and Sapphira? Whenever the Christians in Jerusalem were settling their homes and stuff and helping out everybody, though God had not given them a rule or a law that said they had to do that, they were just doing it out of love. Well, Ananias and Sapphira, they did not have to sell their land. They did not have to sell their house. And besides, if they sold it and it was outside the city wall, they would have got it back at the year of Jubilee anyway. But they wanted, they had so much pride. They wanted everybody to think that they were so good. And Ananias comes in, they said, you sell it for that much? He said, yeah, that much. And God had him drop dead because he lied. That was a stupid lie to tell, because even if he was going to donate to that cause and did sell his house, there's nothing that said he had to give all of the proceeds to it. It was a dumb lie that he told. He'd better off dead. Well, I don't know if he's better off dead, but God decided that, that's big enough, we'll take your life. And then when his wife came in, she did the same thing, and they said, behold, the feet of those that carried out your husband going to carry you out too. They were sneakers, is what they were. I don't know if you wore sneakers in high school or whatever, but I'll tell you the main difference between sneakers and regular shoes. Sneakers usually stink. If you're a Christian and you're a sneaker, chances are you're stinking. Spiritually stinking. And then what about, so don't be a sneaker. What about these kind of steel-toed Christians? Sometimes pastors have to preach messages to the church, it's kind of rough. And maybe he don't even know why God's wanting him to preach those kind of message. Maybe it's to correct something that's going on. Or maybe God sees something that's about to happen, and he has the pastor to preach a corrective message to the church. And he gets, maybe for 2 or 3 weeks, he's all tore up about it because he don't want to preach a hard message to the church. You know why? Because he loves you and because he wants you to love him. And it tears him up to have to preach a message like that. God's the first one to know that he needs to preach it. He'll be the second one to know it, and his wife will be the third one to know it. Then if he's got any kids at home, they'll know it too, because he'll be sending them to their room all the time. Go to your room, because he's so tore up. And he'll go and he'll pour his heart out in that message. And then somebody will come up to him and say, oh, that was a good message. That was rough. And if they would have been here, you would have stepped all over their toes if they had been there. Well, if that's the message God wanted the pastor to preach that day, the ones that needed to hear it were there. But you know why they don't feel it? Because they're steel-toed Christians. They got steel-toed shoes, spiritually speaking. And so a sermon doesn't step on their toes. But there is one, and I'll close with this one. There is a footwear that pastors and churches wishes that everybody would wear. Listen to the verse. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. The kind of footwear that God and pastors and churches wishes their members would wear is combat boots. Combat boots. Get in the war for God. In the war for Christ. In the war against sin. And I remember when I first started saying this, maybe as high as 30 years ago, and people used to criticize me over this so much. Well, more and more, they're doing it less and less because they're finally seeing that I was telling them the truth. I said, you know what? I'm not at war with other Christian denominations. I'm not at war with them. I'm not at war with people in our church. I'm not at war with them. And then I'd say, and I'm not at war with the sinners. And, their eyebrows would really go up on that one. I said, I'm at war, and you should be at war with sin. Not the sinner, Not the people in the church, not the other denominations. We shouldn't be at war with them. We should be at war with sin. And in order to be at war with sin, we've got to wear our combat boots. I said I was going to hush, and I am. Some people are running for God. Some people are running from God. Some people are running to God. But this thing about jogging in the natural sense, did you put that in that bulletin where it gives people the excuse not to jog? Because it says the wicked flee when no man's pursuing. So when people's out there jogging, I think, well, you must be wicked. You're fleeing and nobody's pursuing you. They were bragging one day about, some of them were bragging about they'd run a marathon. And I told them, I said, I just finished a 10K marathon Saturday. And they got all excited. You did? At your age? At your size? I said, yeah, but wait a minute. I finished it. But I started it 25 years ago. I only run 2 or 3 feet a day. Well, is that okay? Yes. Because you really, seriously, pace yourself in God. Pace yourself. How many people have you seen that get saved and they catch fire? Boy, I mean, they're really on fire too. And it seems like they just burn up in a few months because they're so on fire. And then next thing you know, they're not even going to church. They need to pace themselves. We've got to do this until God takes us out of here or until he comes to get us. Let's pace ourselves. Put on the combat boots and fight the good fight of faith. Don't be a sneaker. Don't wear hard-toed shoes spiritually. But if people was going to compare your Christian life to a shoe, what kind of shoe would they compare you to?